Hi, I'm Adrian Haverstadt. I am chairman of the Department of Criminal Justice at Berkeley College. A lot of great topics come out of the subject of criminal justice. They are various and sundry. One question that I hear often is, what's the difference between crime and sin? Well, Berkeley College is a Christian college, so we often look to the teachings of the Bible to help us answer the questions of life. And today I would like to explore with you what is the difference between crime and sin. For those of you who know the Bible, since the time of the Garden of Eden and the first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we find society dealing with these two subjects, crime and sin. What are some things that the Bible has to say about each one? Well, as we explore the Bible, we find that there's a difference between sin and crime. Sin, for example, is the willful disobedience of the known will of God. That definition, the willful disobedience of the known will of God, is established for us in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, where God lays out the rules, the law. He says to Adam and Eve, that first couple, enjoy creation, do whatever you want, just walk with me, and by the way, do not eat from this particular tree. Do not eat that fruit. If you do, you shall surely die, or you have sinned against me. Genesis 2:15. And we see sin occurring just in the next chapter. Genesis chapter 3, verses 3 through 6. That's when Eve gives into temptation and takes the fruit and eats it, and gives it to Adam, her husband, who then eats it as well. And that is the origination of sin as we know it today. And it has plagued us through multiple generations since the early days of creation. We also know that sin will be around until Jesus Christ returns and Satan, the evil one, is defeated and the final judgment occurs. We read about this in Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 through 15. Those are great verses to read, talking about how Jesus Christ puts an end to sin and death, and we are plagued with that no more. So that's an understanding of what sin is based upon the Bible. What about crime? How is it different? How is it defined? Crime is defined by Cornell law as an intentional action or omission of an act, either forbidden or required by public law or government. An intentional action or the absence of an action that was needed. One that was defined and described and held by public law or government. So there is an omission and a commission to crime based upon public law, whether we break that law or do not address that law. Sin and crime is not considered to be the same in our society today. They are not one and the same. Let me try to define that for you. Not all sin, for example, is recognized by society or government as a crime. Adultery, for example. In the Bible, adultery is condemned as a sin. We are to only have sexual relations with the man or the woman that we are married to. To do that, to commit an action against that would be to commit a sin. But in society today, it's not necessarily a crime to commit adultery. So there's a difference between that. Private intoxication may be another example. I don't think the government has any laws about a person being inebriated, drunk, blasted in their home. As long as they're not going out publicly and disgracing themselves and causing a ruckus, they can get drunk and fall asleep and get up the next day and do whatever they want, I guess, in terms of going to work or whatever they want to engage. So that wouldn't be considered a crime to have a private intoxication. But the Bible says that we're not to be drunk. And in some instances, that could be very well be a sin. So there's a difference between committing a crime and sin, and how it's viewed by the public. Not all crime would be a sin. Consider that with me. A crime is to transgress the law of the land, the government, or what is set up by society. But there are occasions where we read in the Bible of someone doing that, of honoring God and disobeying the civil government. I think of the book of Daniel, for example, chapter 3 and chapter 6. In chapter 3, we have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 Hebrews. They're friends of Daniel. But the government at the time set up a law. There was one religion that everyone was to practice. And if you didn't bow down to their statue and practice their religion as they said, there was criminal punishment would come your way. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were told by the government at that time that they had to bow and pledge homage to the statue that had been set up in Babylon. They refused, and they were thrown in a fiery furnace. Now, if you know that story from Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 25, you know that God delivered them from the fire. And that's really exciting to read in the Bible. And over in chapter 6, we have the story of Daniel. The government said you cannot pray to any other god but the one set up by the government. Well, Daniel had a practice of going to his window and praying daily, several times a day. And he was caught doing that, and he was thrown in the lion's den by the government. And yet God honored those men in each of those instances. It was at that time they chose to honor God and disobey the government. So there are times when that occurs. I can't think of many examples today here in the United States where that would occur, but it can occur around the world today with people who are aligning themselves with the one true God and Jesus Christ and being truthful to Him and honoring Him. And the government may say they can't do that. So they're taking the risk of doing it, knowing that God's laws are higher and that they should honor that. So we see that not all sin is recognized by society or government as crime, and not all crime would be a sin in the examples that I just shared with you. Let's continue on. What are some things that crime and sin hold in common? When you think about those two things, temptation is always involved. That they hold in common. When it comes to sin, and maybe for crime as well, I think the Bible supports this statement. There is a tempter, Satan. Matthew 4:3 from the Holy Bible talks about Satan being a tempter, always there, crouching at our door, so to speak, and tempting us to do something wrong. And when we talk about sin and crime, there's a temptation always involved. In regards to Satan as a tempter and his influence, whether it's towards sin or crime, Acts chapter 5 verses 3 through 9 tell us that he seeks to fill people's hearts with lies. There's always a lie associated with crime. If I commit this crime, I'll be happy. I'll be fed. I'll have my needs met. I'll have people think highly of me because of the stuff I have or the act that I've done. I'll make a name for myself. And the same would be true for sin. If I can just get a hold of this for myself, I'll feel better about myself. I'll be somebody. Satan often is the one filling our hearts with that lie, the Bible says. His purpose, according to Revelation 12:9, is to deceive the whole world. To deceive the whole world. So he is active throughout the world, roaming around, the New Testament tells us, seeking whom he may devour through his deception. We also know that temptation comes through the system of the world and the flesh, us. You know, we're humans. We have needs, and sometimes when we're in a needy time, we seek to get that need met in a wrong or inappropriate way. The standard of the world tells us if you don't have, you're not significant. And so that's always being pushed before us as we view commercials, whether it's online or on the television, whether we're listening to society, reading the media. It tells us, hey, if you want to be significant, you need this. And oftentimes we act out in inappropriate ways. People will act out in inappropriate ways because of the temptation that comes through the world and the flesh. So we got the world, the flesh, and Satan himself leading us to temptation. Temptation to disobey God and temptation to break civil law. Another thing that sin and crime hold in common is free will. Temptation is overcome by self-control. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 5 tells us. People choose to act against society, and they choose to act against God's law. So there's free will involved in each of those cases, whether it's sin or whether it's crime. Temptation is overcome by not being ignorant of what's going on around us in terms of the schemes of the devil or the pressure of the world or the brokenness or the weakness of our flesh. Those are things we have to overcome, and we must set our will to not give in. I'm thinking of Jesus when he was tempted by Satan on the mountain and in the wilderness. He was very vulnerable, and yet he kept his presence of mind, and he set his will on doing what God wanted him to do and not to cave in to the immediate needs that he was feeling and sensing at that particular time. And he has lived his life as an example for us. We too can be victorious in that same way. Temptation is overcome by free will, whether it's regarding crime or sin. We need to know the Bible says that God never tempts us. Luke chapter 11, verse 4. God never tempts anyone. Temptation is defeated, however, by seeking godly wisdom. When we're being tempted, whether it's the devil, the pressure of the world, or by our own flesh, we immediately must go to God for wisdom. God, what's happening here? I need my need met. I come to you. I ask you to help me. Help me, God, to act appropriately. Help me to trust in you and to believe in you for the outcome so that I will not sin against you or commit a crime against society. God knows how to rescue people from temptation. That's a statement that 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 9 says. God knows how to rescue people. And oftentimes we fail in living the victorious life by simply not turning to God to rescue us. Well, that leads into this final thing I'd like to share with you about crime and sin. There's a victorious life planned for each of us. We can have the victory over both of those things. How do we do that? The Bible says by coming to Jesus, by trusting him, by walking with him daily. It sounds like the Garden of Eden again, doesn't it? God says, Adam and Eve, walk with me. Trust my leadership. Do what I tell you to do, and you'll make it through this life okay. And 1 John 1, 7 through 10 and Revelation 12, 11 tells us that we overcome the things of the world and the devil by relying on Jesus Christ. We must invite him into our lives and place our trust, our hope, our will in him. Romans 8:37 tells us that victory over sin and crime occurs when our life is grounded in Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 10:13 tells us that there is no temptation common to man or humanity that Jesus Christ did not experience and overcome victoriously. Through Jesus Christ, we are overcomers. That says, my friend, today that justice will be served in the world as we look to the example of Jesus Christ and follow his example when we're being tempted to sin against God and to commit an act against society. God has a wonderful plan for your life, and I believe that you too can be victorious. Come study justice with us at Barclay College. Our criminal justice program can help you understand the things of the world in the lens of God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Scriptures. And we'd like to invite you to come be a part of that. Thank you.